The morning of my 40th birthday, I woke up to an empty bed and a post-it note on the nightstand. Flights got moved up. Didn't want to wake you. Back Sunday. Happy birthday, babe. K. That was it. No call. No flowers on the kitchen counter. Just a yellow sticky note with his handwriting that looked rushed, like he'd been in a hurry to leave before I opened my eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The sheets on his side were cold. He'd been gone for hours. His name is Kyle. We'd been married 6 years. And for a long time, I told myself that the way he treated me was just his personality. Driven, distracted, always somewhere else in his head, even when he was physically in the room. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself a lot of things. I'm an interior designer. I run my own small firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I built it from nothing, from a rented desk in a co-working space, one client at a time, until I had a real office with 2 employees and a client list I was genuinely proud of. My mother always said I had the eye. She also always said I had terrible taste in men, but that's a different story. Kyle came into my life at 34. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming. Effortlessly, almost carelessly, like it cost him nothing to make you feel like the most interesting person in the room. He said he was a business consultant. He had an answer for everything. He dressed well. He talked well. My father shook his hand at Thanksgiving and said, "He's a sharp one." And I took that as a seal of approval. We got married 2 years later in Asheville. Small ceremony. My best friend from college was my maid of honor. My mother cried happy tears in the front row. I thought I'd found someone who matched me, someone who understood ambition, who respected work, who wouldn't make me feel guilty for caring about my career. I was wrong about most of that. The first birthday that bothered me was my 37th. Kyle had promised we'd go to this restaurant I'd been wanting to try, a small farm-to-table place outside the city that required a reservation weeks in advance. I'd hinted at it for months. The morning of, he said, a client had a last-minute emergency and he'd make it up to me. We never rescheduled. My 38th, he forgot entirely. I mean that literally. We were at dinner with friends and someone mentioned it was my birthday, and I watched his face do this quick recalibration, this half second of panic he tried to cover with a smile. He bought me flowers from the gas station on the way home. They still had the price sticker on them. My 39th, he planned something, finally. Dinner at a nice place downtown, just the 2 of us. I got dressed up. I was genuinely excited. He spent 45 minutes of the meal on his phone because of some deal he was trying to close. I ate my salmon and looked out the window and thought, this is what I have. 40 though, 40 felt different. 40 felt like a milestone I'd been quietly building toward, not dreading it, like some people do, but marking it. It meant something to me. I had told Kyle this. I had said more than once that I wanted 40 to feel like something worth celebrating. So when I found that post-it note, I didn't cry. I didn't call him screaming. I just sat there in my pajamas in a house that suddenly felt very quiet, and I thought, what am I actually doing here? He was in Cancun. I found out later, not from him, but from a photo that someone tagged him in on Instagram before he could untag it. A group shot on a beach. His arm around a woman I didn't recognize. Drinks in everyone's hands. Sunset behind them. He looked relaxed in a way he never looked when he was home with me. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I called my mother. She lives 40 minutes away in the house I grew up in. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always does, like she's been waiting. I said, "Mom, I need you to come over." She said, "I'm already getting my keys." She arrived in 35 minutes. She must have driven fast. I showed her the post-it note. I showed her the Instagram photo. I didn't say much. My mother is not a dramatic woman. She raised me alone after my father passed when I was 16. She ran a small accounting practice for 22 years. She is practical in the way that people are practical when they've had to be. She looked at everything I showed her, and then she looked at me and she said, "How long has this been going on?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe always." She nodded slowly. She didn't say, "I told you so," though she probably could have. She said, "Okay. Before we do anything else, I need you to listen to me very carefully." I listened. What my mother said in the next 10 minutes changed everything. She told me that 3 months ago, she'd been doing some routine bookkeeping. She helps me with my business accounts sometimes, just to stay sharp, she says, and because she worries about me, she'd noticed something odd in the records. A line of credit that had been opened in my business name that I hadn't told her about. She'd assumed I'd taken it out for equipment or a lease expansion and hadn't mentioned it yet. But it had been nagging at her. She had printed the paperwork and was going to ask me about it next week. She got up, went to her car, and came back with a folder. I looked at the documents inside and felt the floor shift under me. Kyle had opened a $60,000 line of credit using my business as collateral, my EIN, my business credit history. My name on the documents, forged, but close enough to my actual signature that I hadn't caught it because I hadn't known to look. The draws on the account had been going out in irregular amounts over the past 14 months. Two accounts I didn't recognize, $60,000. I sat at my kitchen table on my 40th birthday and looked at documents that told me my husband had been stealing from me. Not from our joint account, from my business. The thing I had built before he ever came into my life. My mother put her hand over mine and said, "We're going to handle this, but we have to move fast. And we have to be smart." I wanted to call Kyle. I wanted to call him and scream into the phone. My mother looked at me and said, "Not yet." She said it quietly but firmly, the way she used to when I was a teenager about to make a decision I'd regret. Not yet. She made 2 calls from my kitchen table. The first was to her attorney, a woman she's worked with for years, someone who handles business law and family law, someone who my mother described as not someone you want across from you at a table. Her name was Patricia Wynne. She said she could meet us the following morning. The second call was to my accountant. My mother explained the situation in 3 sentences. My accountant said she'd pull everything by end of day. That afternoon was surreal. It was still my birthday. The sun was doing what it does in Charlotte in early October, coming in sideways through the windows, warm and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look a little like a painting. My mother made us both tea. We sat across from each other at the kitchen island and went through every document she'd brought, and then we went through my business records on my laptop, and slowly a picture emerged that was worse than what I'd initially seen. It wasn't just the line of credit. Over the past 2 years, Kyle had been using my business reputation, literally, my name and my firm's name, to co-sign on 2 consulting contracts with companies I'd never heard of. He'd represented himself as my business partner in those agreements. The contracts had my firm listed as a co-guarantor. If those deals went bad, and my accountant suspected at least one already had, I would be liable. He had built a house of cards using the foundation I'd spent a decade constructing. And he had done it quietly, carefully, in ways that he must have calculated would take me a long time to notice. I thought about all the times he'd asked to use my home office when I was out. All the times he'd borrowed my laptop because mine is updating. All the times he'd asked casually what my business revenue looked like this quarter, framed as interest, as partnership, as someone who cared about my success. He wasn't interested in my success. He was mapping it. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because I was afraid. Kyle wasn't due back until Sunday, and it was only Friday, but because I couldn't sleep in that bed. It smelled like him. It smelled like 6 years of believing something that wasn't true. Saturday morning, I met with Patricia Wynne. She was exactly what my mother had described: compact, precise, the kind of woman who doesn't waste words. She went through every document my mother and accountant had prepared, and she asked me questions in a calm, methodical way that somehow made me feel more in control just by answering them. At the end of 2 hours, she laid out exactly what we were looking at. What Kyle had done was wire fraud, potentially identity theft, definitely breach of fiduciary duty within our marriage. She said the line of credit alone was enough to pursue criminal charges. She said she wanted to move before he got back. I asked her what move meant. She told me. By Saturday afternoon, the joint bank accounts had been flagged and separated. My attorney had filed emergency paperwork to protect my business assets. A forensic accountant had been brought in to document everything. My business line of credit had been frozen pending the fraud investigation, and a letter had been drafted, not sent yet, but drafted, that would be waiting for Kyle when he landed. I also changed the locks. I know that sounds small compared to everything else. But standing in my own doorway while the locksmith worked, holding my coffee, watching him replace the deadbolt on the door of the house that I had bought, my name on the mortgage, my down payment, my credit score that made it possible, felt like the first thing I'd done in years that was entirely, completely mine. Kyle landed Sunday afternoon. I know because I got a notification from the app we used to share locations. I hadn't removed him yet, and neither had he, which told me he wasn't expecting any of this. He called me from the Uber on the way home. He sounded relaxed. He called me babe. He said the trip had been pretty productive and asked if I wanted him to pick up dinner. I said, "There's a letter on the front step. Read it before you try to come in." Silence. "Then what?" I said. "The locks have been changed. Read the letter." I hung up. My mother was sitting next to me on the couch. She didn't say anything. She just handed me a glass of water. 12 minutes later, my phone rang. Not Kyle, his attorney. He had apparently called someone immediately, which told me the letter had landed exactly the way Patricia intended it to. His attorney said Kyle was blindsided and wanted to talk. Patricia had already anticipated this. She called me 2 minutes later and said, "Let me handle the conversation. Do not speak to him directly today." I didn't. What I learned over the next 2 weeks came in pieces, each one heavier than the last. The woman in the Instagram photo, I don't know how long. His attorney claimed it was recent. The forensic accountant's timeline suggested he'd been moving money in ways that benefited someone other than himself for at least 18 months, which tells its own story. The consulting contracts he'd signed in my firm's name had already attracted scrutiny from one of the other companies involved. My attorney believes he was about to be exposed and needed my business standing as a shield. That the escalation of his use of my name in the months before this happened wasn't coincidence. He had also, and this one made me physically ill, applied for a personal loan using projected income from my business as the supporting documentation. He'd listed himself as co-owner. He was not a co-owner. He had never been a co-owner. He had simply written it down on a form and signed it. 60,000 from the line of credit, an undetermined amount from the consulting fraud, and a personal loan for 35,000 that he'd managed to get approved 6 months ago. He had used me. He had looked at everything I'd built and seen a resource. I think about the version of myself who read that post-it note on Friday morning and just felt sad. Just quietly, privately sad. What if I hadn't called my mother? What if I'd sent him an angry text and let him come home and talk his way around it, which he absolutely would have tried? What if I'd believed him? The fraud case is ongoing. My attorney expects a settlement that will require him to repay everything, and the criminal referral is still on the table depending on how cooperative he chooses to be. We filed for divorce in October. It's not contested. He doesn't have the standing to contest much of anything right now. The house is mine. It was always mine on paper, and now it's mine in practice. I had the bedroom repainted in November, a deep, quiet sage green that my mother helped me pick out. She said it looked like the beginning of something, and I thought that was exactly right. My firm survived. The fraud investigation actually helped. In a strange way, it created a paper trail that clearly separated what I had built from what he had done, and my clients were told only that there had been an attempted unauthorized use of my business identity, which was true, and which most of them responded to with something close to outrage on my behalf. I didn't lose a single contract. There's a particular kind of grief in realizing that someone you loved was never fully real. Not the relationship. The relationship was real, the dinners and the inside jokes and the Sunday mornings. But the person you thought you were in it with, the version of him that you believed in, I'm not sure Kyle ever existed. I think there was just someone who needed a foundation to build on, and I had one, and he was very good at pretending to be the person I would let in. My mother checks on me every few days. She comes over on Sunday mornings sometimes, and we sit at the kitchen island and drink coffee and talk about nothing in particular. She doesn't ask how I'm doing in the way that requires a formal answer. She just shows up. She has always just shown up. I turned 40 in an empty house with a post-it note and a photograph of a beach I wasn't invited to. That was the last morning I spent not knowing what was happening in my own life. Everything after that, the paperwork, the attorney's calls, the forensic accountant's spreadsheets, even the locksmith on a Saturday afternoon, all of it was me knowing exactly what I was doing, choosing exactly where I stood. I'm not who I was on that Friday morning. I'm something I don't quite have a name for yet. Clearer, maybe, more myself than I've been in 6 years. It turns out 40 is a very good age to start over. I'm only a few months in, and I'm already starting to see it that way. I've thought a lot about what made Kyle think he could get away with it. And I don't think it was arrogance exactly. Or not only that. I think it was the slow, steady message I had been sending him for years without realizing it. Every birthday I let slide. Every dinner where he was on his phone and I said nothing. Every time I made space for his excuses because I didn't want to be the kind of woman who makes things difficult, I had been telling him over and over that there were no real consequences for how he treated me, and he believed me. Why wouldn't he? That's not me blaming myself for what he did. He made his choices, forging my signature, using my business, lying about who he was in legal documents. Those were his decisions, and he'll live with what they've cost him. But I do think there's something true in the idea that the way we allow people to treat us teaches them what we'll accept. I accepted a lot. For a long time, I told myself that was patience or grace or being a good partner. It wasn't. It was me disappearing, a little at a time, until there was just enough of me left to find a post-it note on a nightstand and feel nothing but tired. What my mother did, showing up in 35 minutes, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table and saying, "We have to move fast and we have to be smart," that wasn't just loyalty. That was someone who had watched me shrink for 6 years, finally getting the chance to help me stand back up. She had done the work quietly on her own because she was paying attention when I wasn't paying attention to myself. That kind of love is rare. I don't take it for granted anymore. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 39. Intelligence isn't just about being good at your work or making smart decisions in a boardroom. It's about being honest with yourself when something is wrong. Really honest. Not the kind where you acknowledge the problem and then immediately explain it away, but the kind where you sit with the discomfort and let it tell you what it needs to tell you. I had been smart enough to build a business from nothing. I hadn't been smart enough to look clearly at the person sleeping next to me. Those are different kinds of knowing, and the second one matters just as much. The courage it took to change the locks, to let Patricia make that call, to not pick up the phone when Kyle's number appeared, that wasn't something I had always had. I had to find it, and I found it in the most ordinary place, just deciding that I was done. Not dramatically, not with a speech. just quietly, firmly. The way you close the door, you're not going to open again. What happened to Kyle happened because of what Kyle did. Cause and effect, plain and simple. He built something dishonest, and it came apart the way dishonest things always do. Not all at once, but in pieces, each one worse than the last. I didn't ruin his life. He made choices that had a direction, and they arrived at their destination. I'm 40 now. My bedroom is sage green. My firm is intact. My mother comes over on Sunday mornings and we drink coffee and don't talk about him at all. That's not a small thing. That's everything.